Hello, everyone. Welcome to Launch Your Career. This episode was filmed earlier today, Pacific time, with Liam and myself. Liam is based in Europe, so is sleeping right now, and so I'm going to be answering questions live in the chat as we air this recording. It was a really fun one to produce and such. So if you have any questions for me, be sure to type them in the chat window. If there's any questions that you have that I don't feel like I can answer, that I really need to get Liam's expertise on, I'll be sure to follow up on that as well. And we'll do that in the Tech Communities channel, which we'll also post as well. In the meantime, enjoy this, and I will see you on the other side. Thank you. Hello, good day, everyone. Welcome to Launch Your Career. Today, we're going to focus on DevOps engineer. But if you've been with us on this journey in our third episode of what I think is going to be about 24, we're exploring different job roles around tech. Really exploring what a day in the life is like to be in that job role, is also thinking about the job skills and career skills you need to be successful in that as well. Today, my guest is Liam Hampton. Welcome, Liam.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me on, Justin. This is a really good episode, and I can't wait to share a little bit about DevOps.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we get to that, I just want to remind everyone out there who's learning with us that we have a code of conduct. Obviously, be polite, be respectful, but most importantly, share your ideas and your questions. This is a Q&A forum. We're airing this live, but later today, we also will be doing a recorded where we have a live chat Q&A. So if you want even more questions answered, be sure to check out that forum as well. But hey, let's get right into it, Liam. So let's get to know you a little bit better as a DevOps engineer. So first of all, I've known Liam probably a little over a year now, right? Is that about right, Liam?
Yes, about 18 months now, I think.
About 18 months. Has it been that long and stuff? And so I've just been inspired by the way you think about your advocacy, the way you share technologies. But most importantly, probably the stuff I've watched the most is the stuff that you are doing in DevOps. It's really cutting edge. You're trying all sorts of different technologies and exploring that. And so I don't know, maybe tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got into DevOps.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, so I'm based in the UK, so I'm in London, which is lovely at the moment. As you can probably tell, it's a little bit dark because it's nice and grey and raining outside. I started off my career as a software engineer, and I actually worked at IBM. And that was kind of where I transitioned into DevOps because I inadvertently took on the role of working in a DevOps environment. So building pipelines, building YAML files and Groovy for Jenkins and things like that. So I really got into the rhythm of building sequentially executed code, which really stuck with me. I really liked it and just kind of took it on from there. So it's one of those things where if something goes wrong, it's quite identifiable to debug and work with given the error messages that you have. It's not like software code that you're writing where, you might have like a null exception. What's the null exception? It pretty much tells you it goes wrong at this line with this problem, and it's probably going to be that container.
Certainly. Awesome. Well, what town, at least initially when I was early in life, Indianapolis, and where Indy racing cars, all of the cultural elements. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about what you love about Formula One and racing. And I know there's like a data component about this, isn't there, right?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I have followed Formula One for as long as I can remember. It's like a family sport for me.
Yeah.
We've all grown up with it. We've all loved it. We've all it's just been around every sort of Sunday. Used to be race day, or it still is. And it's just always been integrated into my life. Now, the thing which I love most about Formula One, as I've grown up around the tech industry and with all this, is questioning how does that work? How do they know the lap times are that fast within sort of milliseconds of each other? It's really one of those contention points where I'll look at it and I think, how does that happen? Why does it happen? And then you sort of go down a rabbit hole of trying to figure it out and then understanding the technology behind it with
Hi, everyone. Looks like we lost our stream source during this, so I'm just waiting for my colleague to log back in and continue the video. So apologies for the delay. We'll get back to it in just a minute here. In the meantime, if you want to ask any sort of questions you have about DevOps and things like that, I am available in live chat to talk and such. So let's use that time there. I can see there's quite a few of you out there. Yes. Chris, bye video. Hopefully, hello video will come back here in just a minute. Thank you. And how you got into DevOps?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, so I'm based in the UK, so I'm in London, which is lovely at the moment. As you can probably tell, it's a little bit dark because it's nice and grey and raining outside. I started off my career as a software engineer, and I actually worked at IBM. And that was kind of where I transitioned into DevOps because I inadvertently took on the role of working in a DevOps environment. So building pipelines, building YAML files and Groovy for Jenkins and things like that. So I really got into the rhythm of building sequential or sequentially executed code, which really stuck with me. I really liked it and just kind of took it on from there. So it's one of those things where if something goes wrong, it's quite identifiable to debug and work with given the error messages that you have. It's not like software code that you're writing where, you might have like a null exception. What's the null exception? It pretty much tells you it goes wrong at this line with this problem, and it's probably going to be that container. So that's why I like it. It's quite intuitive.
Straightforward debugging. That's a good one. I never thought about that before, but I understand that now, certainly. Awesome. Well, one of the things I know about you, Liam, is that you are a fan of Formula One racing. And when we were getting to know each other, it just so happens that I grew up in a little town, at least initially when I was early in life, in Indianapolis, and where Indy racing cars were all of the cultural elements. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about what you love about Formula One and racing. And I know there's like a data component about this, isn't there, right?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I have followed Formula One for as long as I can remember. It's like a family sport for me.
Yeah.
We've all grown up with it. We've all loved it. We've all it's just been around every sort of Sunday. Used to be race day, or it still is. And it's just always been integrated into my life. Now, the thing which I love most about Formula One, as I've grown up around the tech industry and with all this, is questioning how does that work? How do they know the lap times are that fast within sort of milliseconds of each other? Yeah. It's really one of those contention points where I'll look at it and I think, how does that happen? Why does it happen? And then you sort of go down a rabbit hole of trying to figure it out and then understanding the technology behind it with sort of message queues and sort of lightweight data. Because if you think about it, I think a statistical fact when I was reading about this, a Formula One car creates about 30 megabytes of data every single lap. And if you combine that over a number of laps, over a number of races, over a number of seasons, you end up with big chunks of data. And it's just one of those fascinating things where you wonder where it all gets stored and how it's all put together. So it's not just watching it, it's understanding it from it as well.
Yeah. Auto racing is one of those things where the data and telemetry element is just, I think for we geeks out there, that it's probably one of the most fascinating sports that one can get involved in because you're dealing with pressures and sensitivity and speed and air drag and all of these aerodynamic things that happen in milliseconds. And so the data substrate is the difference between a car winning and a car losing. And specifically, like say, I told you I grew up in the Indy 500, a family that was really into that. And the Indy 500 is like one of the fastest races where people, cars exceed, I think it's 228 miles per hour. Sorry for you all that in the kilometer conversion there, but I'm pretty sure that's well above the 300, 350 range or things like that if I'm doing my conversion. And, specifically in the race, the way to win is to catch basically to catch the drift. You ride somebody's air and then you're able to kind of slingshot your way in front of them. And there's really only one or two corners where you're able to pass. Well, it turns out that the data is what makes that possible, because people in the downforce and everything like that, like that is the difference. It's fascinating. It's actually one of those things that kind of got me excited about data, that it could be interesting and learn more about that as well. So pretty cool stuff. Just the thrill of the engines, but also the data and all of the science that comes behind it and such. Pretty cool.
Oh yes, for sure.
Well, very cool. Well, before we get to know you a little bit more and talk about that, let's go to our Cloud Skills Challenge here. Let me add this quickly to the slide. There we go. And so for all of you out there that are following us, speaking of data, our last episode was about data. And so if you haven't checked that out yet, please do. This show is aka.ms/launch-your-career. But we have a Cloud Skills Challenge where you can explore one learning module for free of all the different job roles that we're covering. And that's available on aka.ms/launch-your-career-skills. So launch your career for the show and launch your career skills for the Cloud Skills Challenge and stuff. So be sure to check that out if you haven't already. So, all right, let's get into it a little bit more. Liam, I know you got a demo later on to kind of show us a day in the life, but first of all, what do you love most about DevOps? And where I'm going with that is, what are the things that perhaps are a little more challenging?
So what do I love about it? I kind of alluded to it already, but it's the sequential execution of technologies. That's what I love so much about it. It's like when you're writing a deployment pipeline, for example, you're writing it as if you're thinking it. You're not having to think asynchronously, because a pipeline won't work asynchronously. When you're looking at deploying with config management, so if you're using something like Ansible or Puppet or Chef, one of these lovely tools that you're going to use to deploy configurations, you're thinking of it and you're writing it as you think. It's not going to be, you're going to do A, then C, then B. You're going to do A, B, and C. That's how you sort of read through it. That's what I love so much about DevOps, as well as the spectrum of technologies. So it's not a technology itself. DevOps is a culture, and it's a culture shift from very much monolithic, tight teams where you go team A to team B to team C. It's where many developers have many hats, and you're all using different technologies and you're all understanding. So it's really like a growth experience. That's the best bit about it, certainly from an engineer.
Yeah. I love what you said about that DevOps is a culture. I feel like that's a quotable moment. And that really resonates with me, because culture is about people. And so, if DevOps is a culture, it's a pretty awesome profession to be in, the sort of the management and organization of people, because you get to see people succeed through that, or you get to see successful teams write an incredible application together and stuff like that. So I really love that.
Well, a big part of the DevOps, being part of a DevOps engineer, is being able to communicate effectively with teams. Right, so you're communicating with different software developers. You're communicating with stakeholders, team managers, product managers. So you're in the middle. You're in the mix of all of that. But you're one of the most actively sort of verbal people as a role. Right, you're not heads down coding all the time. There's a lot of it of being able to manage people and manage your project and product at the same time. So yeah, a lot of it is about culture. It's about people management. It's about understanding the product at a framework level, not at like the guts and glory as a software developer would sort of see it. Yeah,
totally. So what do you find to be hard about it? Like, what do you think the challenges of being a DevOps engineer are?
Oh, there's a few. Probably the first two that I would probably go to is the breadth and depth of knowledge that you need to know about different technologies. Because there's so many, you're expected to know a lot about everything. So you have sort of like a cross breadth, and you've got your depth going down in terms of knowledge. When it comes to certain technologies, you really need to know a lot about Terraform, or a lot about delivery, or sort of infrastructure management, as well as being able to code, as well as being able to use Kubernetes or Ansible or all these other tools. You need to know quite a lot about them. That's not a bad thing, but as an engineer, it can become difficult. It's a contentious point where you need to say, right, I know enough about this, and then have to learn something new. And it's just a consistent cycle. So there's no such thing as learning too much or knowing too much. It's the velocity at which that comes at you. That's probably one of the harder parts.
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, because you are interacting with all of the different technical roles, developers, software engineers, architects, data engineers, and such. Like you, it has a role, has a fair amount of range, right? Like where you have to know a little of everything. But one of the things I heard you say there that's really interesting is you got to be that lifetime learner, that you're picking up new things and know enough to be a little dangerous about things like that as well.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the other parts is kind of backs off onto that is it's a really high pressure environment to be in. So if you think about it, you're a DevOps engineer, you've got this really cool product in production, and on a Friday night, someone decides they want to push some code. Not that you should, but somebody decides you do, and it goes down. The DevOps engineer is sort of pickup, right? The software engineer is going to help you. But as a DevOps engineer, you need to pick the stack up the floor. You need to put it back into production. You need to make it, do the rollback of the system. It's a really high pressure environment, and it's sort of your There's a term where your price against time. So how long can your system be down for versus how much is that going to cost you? That really comes into effect as a DevOps engineer. You need to be able to pick that up and not cost the company much money, right? You're there to stop it from overflowing and costing thousands in downtime.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like leadership to me. And I see a couple cool comments on there. Mafaba saying, sounds more like tool management than engineering. What's I think interesting, in my opinion, about DevOps is, you've got a set of tools to do it, but the fundamentals of DevOps they're about people and about systems and how people interact with systems. And so the tools are important, but only one dimension, I think, of what I heard you say there. We are going to talk more tools later on in the stream, I might add, as well. PowerShell, ARM, Bicep, and that kind of stuff too. So
yeah, well, I think a good analogy to use actually for this, just to help people understand, is think about the construction of a house. Software engineers, people often find it difficult to distinguish between a software engineer and a DevOps engineer. Now, a software engineer is somebody who's going to be looking at the blueprint, who's going to be gathering the materials for the house, who's going to be putting the pipes together and the electricals in. Whereas a DevOps engineer is going to be the person overseeing the construction of the house, right? They're going to make sure the tools are available to use. They're going to make sure everything's available from 9 o'clock in the morning. They're going to oversee the construction and make sure it's on time. That's the kind of difference between a DevOps engineer and a software engineer. So yeah, that kind of brings people and tools together and ensures it's fair.
Yeah, for sure. Alan in the chat window says, people, process, then technology. I like that. I've heard that before. I believe some of our predecessors in DevOps have said those in other Microsoft streams and variations thereof. And I couldn't agree more and such.
Yes. Yes.
Well, let's look at DevOps engineer at a glance. For those of you who have been part of this show, you're starting to see that I take to LinkedIn and I kind of look at what are the different jobs that are available right now in DevOps. The 142,000 you see is a filter in the past month in the United States. There's obviously even more jobs all around the world on that, but DevOps especially is one of the keywords, one of the specialties that commands amongst the widest range of job roles. And so I encourage you all to kind of search on this. But if you go to DevOps in general, you get 142,000. If you get DevOps engineer, you get a subset of that. And it kind of speaks to just the wide variation that there are specialists that are DevOps engineers, but there are also most technical professions have some element of DevOps in them that is a keyworded in resumes or in other job roles as well. So what do you think about that, Liam? Like, what's the difference in your mind between like a DevOps engineer, the job role itself, and then just doing DevOps within your current software engineering role, for example?
Yeah, so that kind of hits on something I was going to talk about, was one, DevOps being a buzzword, which is thrown around quite loosely, as you can probably see by the number of results you get from that search in LinkedIn. And secondly, everybody in the team should wear multiple hats. In an agile team, or in a truly agile team, the software engineer should be able to plan, should be able to build, test, deploy, and monitor their own code, right? That's the ethos of DevOps. In reality, that's never going to happen. But it's certainly allows the software engineer to have more freedom in terms of the skills that they're learning, in terms of the technologies they're using. I, off my own back, have actively built pipelines for my own deployment just to save time, knowing that having to hand this off to somebody might be quite arduous, or I have to document it to the nth degree to have somebody else understand it from a software engineering perspective. So let's not forget, I've worn sort of both hats here. And it's quite a difficult one to determine the difference. But at some point, you have to say, I'm going to stop here because this is not my job, and then hand it over to somebody else where it is their job. So it's an interesting one. It is. It seems to be thrown around quite a lot, but it's a good sort of contentious point.
Yeah, I agree. And, as I was kind of searching here, I was looking at the different role variations in it. And, you see in a cloud or a cloud native engineer is a very common job role. It's very popular. I encourage you all to kind of search on that. But DevOps pops in that job rec for many reasons. That, DevOps is a cloud native profession. And I see a couple comments with people talking about infrastructure as code and not using GUI and things like that. There's obviously cultural elements and productivity elements of that we can explore, but the role is very much technical. And you think about the tooling that you use and how that all comes together. It's really truly multifaceted as well. Liam, I one of them in here is not like the other in my core skills. You see how I have like cloud admin, release management, agile, scrum. I suspect most people know about those terms, but one of them there is Golang, and you happen to be also a specialist in Go language as well. I don't know, what is the role that Go plays in DevOps there?
Good question. I like that. And this is actually where the real underlying foundation of where this all came around. When I was developing as a software engineer, I was given a task to create a CLI. And for those of you who don't know, what the command line interface for longer term. And I was the only person in the team at the time to learn Go and understand Go. Now, this was really fun. This was great to learn. I then went on to learn that Go actually is the language of cloud native development. So if you look at Kubernetes, it was written in Go. If you look at Docker, it's written in Go. If you look at Terraform, all these other wonderful products that are out there, most of them are written in Go. If you look at the CNCF Foundation, I believe about 75% of the projects are written in Go. Yeah. Now, if you flip that on its head and say, well, if they're all written in Go, does that make Go a cloud native language? Well, yes, it does. It's also really, really powerful when it comes to writing scripts or sort of short, small binaries, which are cross-platform compatible. So if you want to build the same program for Mac, Windows, I don't know, if you're adventurous Solaris, different distributions of other operating systems, you can. So that's where Go comes into effect with DevOps, because you can essentially write the programs that you're testing for different platforms in one language, and it's pretty simple to do.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I know for those of you who have attended my shows or streams of this in the past, you probably hear me always talking about Python and JavaScript. Those are kind of some of my historic backgrounds or things I've explored. And so I've learned a lot, Liam, from you about Go and just the purpose it is. And it really has a great connective tissue with DevOps and such. So if you're curious out there and you want to learn a new language or try something new, go. I know, Liam, you're doing the Go show right now, I think, amongst others. So yeah, if y'all are passionate about that, go check out Liam's show, the Go show as well. Cool. Well, I also want to share a little bit more about certification tracks in DevOps engineering and such. We, Microsoft, have a certification track. It's actually a multi-step one where you can move all the way to a DevOps expert, a certified engineering expert. Obviously, we are one of many different industry certifications that people can gather. We always recommend it. We're here at Microsoft, but we always try to think about inclusivity when we think about learning. So I encourage you to obtain multiple certifications. Other cloud providers provide similar things and that. So definitely encourage there. But if you're interested in about a certification track, we've got a great one here at Microsoft Learn and such. Liam, what's your thoughts on certification, when you should get them, other things like that?
I saw that question coming. I think of all people, I think you're aware of where I stand on certifications, but on a good note, they are really good to have. They're a great asset to have in your arsenal when it comes to applying for jobs, when it goes to showing that you can go an extra mile around a subject that you want to learn about. Now, what I don't necessarily like about them is it can kind of make people feel they don't need to have the hands-on experience.
Yeah.
Now, I know a lot of certifications are taking this into consideration, and I know we certainly have at Microsoft that we have got sandboxes available. So if you want to go through Microsoft Learn modules, you have a sandbox available for you to get hands-on with. Now, a few years ago, when I was doing a whole bunch of certifications, when I was looking for different jobs and I was sort of moving around, I was missing the hands-on feeling of getting hands-on into a project. I remember doing one, and I think it was a cloud developer certification, and I actually had to create a project for the certification to be certified. I had to create a project and submit it through GitHub and have it all like peer marked and whatnot. So yeah, I think they're really good to have. You just must have that hands-on experience as well, whether it's in a job, whether it's a portfolio or project that you're doing yourself, whether you're building pipelines and just showing you can create automation and showing you understand it. That's bigger and more favorable than actually having a piece of paper to say, I can do my homework, because there's two different parts to it there.
Yeah, I like that. I share that sentiment that certifications are an important complement, but not a substitute to real world experience or best practice. And in previous episodes, we were talking about this with cybersecurity engineering as well. Is that there's a ton of industry certifications and things like that, but one of the things that Sarah Young on that said is, don't go out and get the expensive certifications. Maybe have your employer pay for those someday. Start out with real practice and experience, but consider if you're going to go the cert route, get the stuff that is free or cheap. In fact, it's one of the things why Microsoft's designed Microsoft Learn, for example, is that you have access to all the materials. Oftentimes there are discounts on certs and things like that. And programs. So just encourage you all to check it out. But I like the combination of real world experience with certs and such. So good stuff all around. Well, I saw an earlier comment in the chat window about DevOps and AI. Certainly AI, and specifically generative AI, is a pretty hot topic right now as well. So Liam, how have you been experimenting with AI and large scale models and other things like that as you think about a DevOps engineer?
Yeah, that's I was kind of waiting for this to come up in some nature or another on one of the live streams I've been doing, and I'm kind of glad it's this one. So to give you an example, everybody knows about ChatGPT, everybody knows about GitHub Copilot, and those are the two which I'm using the most. Now, obviously, I don't put any sensitive information into them, but what I am doing is I'm getting it to reference or explain something for me. So for example, I think it was only last week, I was building a Docker file to create or sort of package up an application I was building and playing with. And there was something which I found online. It said, oh, you should do it this way. So I was kind of like, well, why should I do it that way? So I copied it. I read the article that they were writing about. It didn't really make too much sense. I put it into ChatGPT and I said, can you summarize this? Can you show me or tell me why it's better than what I'm doing and help me understand it? And that is a fundamental asset to have as an engineer, because it's going to help speed up our development tenfold. If somebody can tell me a better way to do something and then explain it, I'm all for that. I'm not going to say no to it. If it's going to help me create those files, even better. If I have errors and I can just copy and paste the error into it and say, hey, can you explain this error? It's a horrible system error. What does it really mean? Rather than having to Google and go through Stack Overflow and go through all these sort of GitHub issues, it's a and have it assist me whilst doing that. If anybody on here has watched any of my previous streams, you would have seen me use Copilot already in a number of those streams, helping me create and speed through a lot more code to help. It basically helps me help you. It's one of those assistants which I wouldn't have been able to get through the time and do all of that code if I didn't have it. I only would have done maybe half of it, because I'd have to write it out or copy and paste it in. And it's a lot more free flowing.
Yeah, I think to some degree, DevOps is one of the original areas of automation in software technology. That's, I think, the concept, if I'm restating the definition there, along with CI/CD and other disciplines and things like that. And so to some degree, like generative AI is like a perfect complement to the productivity of what a DevOps engineer does or might do even more someday. And to attach that to what we talked about earlier about culture, if you as a DevOps engineer can spend less time copy and pasting, rewriting code or things like that, that allows you to focus more on the cultural elements of DevOps, the people side, mobilizing, problem solving, moving your backlog, all of that stuff. And so I think it's going to be a profound shift in the next few years using these tools, and certainly encourage you out there someday as a DevOps engineer, like, improve these tools, help us improve these tools, GitHub Copilot and others. But I could see us having the GitHub Copilot of DevOps in the future and be more specialized there and such, right?
Well, there's a lot around prompt engineering. So this is going to become like a whole subset of category itself of how would you prompt these AI models? How would you get the best out of them? You can't just ask it a question, like a real one-line sentence. You have to say, act as this, give me this, give it in this format, etc. And you have to really tell it what to do. So I've seen a lot around these articles saying, it's going to replace developers. It's going to replace developers that aren't able to use it or utilize it, right? So that's where it's going, especially with DevOps. Like I said, if it can teach me something new, I am all for that. If I'm going to plug something in and ask it how to do something and it gives me a different result than what I've got, compare and contrast and see why. It's one of those places where you can go to and learn from. It's a huge asset.
Yeah. And indeed, I think with generative AI, these models that we're exploring are only going to get smart and be trained with more dimensions as more people use them. That was the power that search indexing created many years ago, and how we use search every day to find information that we're looking for. So I try not to be too much of future seeking on this. There are people that are far more expert and smarter than me and kind of looking at the trends. But if I were to offer, my own personal opinion, like I think, over time, there's going to be these more domain specific models. And so I could see, just like there's Codex or Copilot with GitHub Copilot, there's going to be more of a domain specific DevOps assist that is able to get more contextual, and you're going to be able to give it feedback when it gives you the right code or the wrong code or things like that, and such in the future too. So yeah, very, very interesting stuff. So no, if you're interested in becoming a DevOps engineer, I would definitely check out some of the generative AI and GitHub Copilot and other tools like that, because I do think they are the future in part. Speaking of tools, so I think some of the members of the chat talked a little bit more about some of the tools of the trade in DevOps. Liam, give us kind of the lay of the land of like what tools do you use now? What are maybe some tools you've used in the past, and at some point we'll break into the demo I think you want to show here.
Yeah, for sure. There's also a couple of questions in the chat which I'll address after this as well. But if we're going to look at tooling, if we can think of like the infinity lifecycle or the unofficial mascot logo, whatever you want to call it, for DevOps, it's broken into, I think, 8 stages. And at each stage, you've got different different technologies, right? So you'd really start with planning and committing. So you'd look at collaboration, where you've got Jira, you've got project boards in GitHub, you've got Trello boards, you've got all these wonderful Kanban sort of assistive tools. And obviously you have Teams, Microsoft Teams, you have Slack, you've got all these lovely sort of collaborative tools. Now that's exactly going back to what I said earlier. As a DevOps engineer, you need to be able to collaborate well. And people think creating issues on GitHub is just really easy. There's a structured method to do it. Now, if anybody's dug deep into GitHub before, you'll see that you can create templates for issues, for pull requests. You can have these templates sort of laid out for you. And it's actually a really good way of a DevOps engineer to get the best out of a software development team, right? To help organize the backlog, to help really collaborate effectively, to help connect issues with pull requests and so forth and whatnot, and blockages. So yeah, you'd use Jira for that. Version control, you've got Git, you've got Subversion. I've used both of those, and Git is by far my favorite. What else do we have? I've actually got a whole list actually written down so I don't forget any. CI/CD, you have Jenkins, you've got Circle CI, you've got Travis CI. Basically anything with CI at the end is a good tool for CI/CD, as you'll probably find out across the landscape. So they're really good. GitHub Actions is probably my favorite of all. And I'm actually going to show you how I use GitHub Actions to automate deployments today with Azure. You've got containers, so Kubernetes, Docker. For those of you who don't use Docker because of its paywall now, you've got Podman, which is essentially the same thing. If you have it ingrained on your brain like I do, I actually use Podman underneath with a Docker alias in my terminal. It's just an easier way to do Docker PS, which Podman PS is an open source version of Docker, basically. So that's a really good way. And it kind of that's a good sort of point to talk about containers and how that has affected cloud native development. So containers is fundamentally a networking umbrella. And I love this. So I actually have a degree in networking, and you'd be surprised at similarities you'd see between like your physical racks and stacks versus Kubernetes, and how that really works with the internals and the guts of Kubernetes when you're talking to different pods and scaling at a production level system. So that's a really good rabbit hole we can go down another time. What else we have? You've got cloud, you've got Azure, of course. We've got all the other wonderful clouds that you can use. That's not really anything new, but within those you have different services. So you've got monitoring, you've got logging, you've got different ways to see how your application is performing, any bottlenecks that you may come across. As you can kind of see here, there's so many different tools that a DevOps engineer has to really think about and look at. But of course, I use Azure. I look at logging in Azure. I also use Logstash. I've used Splunk for monitoring. So some really cool projects and products out there. Tons and tons of them, open source. This is just my personal ones, which I use for fun. So yeah, that's a couple of the tools I've used. What else do we have? We have sort of automated, a big one, automated stand-up for infrastructure. So you have things like Terraform and Bicep. Yeah. You've got obviously different cloud native ones. If you're looking at AWS, I think you have cloud. There's another one for them, just like we have Bicep. So many that you can use.
Yeah. And it's really such a range. I think of it as maybe like a little bit of a different tool in your toolkit for each need and such. And so if you're hearing that for the first time, you're like, oh my gosh, that's a lot to ramp up to. I think similar to learning a programming language, there are similarities. And so as you pick up one, you're able to pick up another and understand the relative differences and opportunities and strengths that each of them have and such. But I do agree with you that like GitHub and GitHub Actions is a really great place to start for many people. And this is something that data that we get in Microsoft tell us is that a lot of people that are exploring technical professions start in GitHub because they might have heard about open source, or they learn how to fork a repo and then explore that and things like that. So GitHub is a really great entry point. It's also a great place to kind of build your portfolio and practice, like you said earlier, and complement to certs and stuff. So let's talk about GitHub Actions. So how do you use GitHub Actions? And I think this is the one where it's time to break into the demo, Liam.
Yeah, I will. I'll just quickly give an overview of what GitHub Actions is, actually. So GitHub Actions is the CI/CD pipeline or delivery method that we can use in GitHub, and it is from within your own repository. You don't need to have any external tools available for it. Now, with that being said, you have like a number of hours available for execution. There's quite a lot. I, so far, have never been charged for it, but there is a cost associated with it, obviously, if you're doing it at this production level. So please be aware of that one. So another good thing with GitHub Actions is a lot of it is open source. So you'll see in a minute when I do run through some code, it's actually a repository on GitHub. So you can create your own actions within GitHub, within pipeline. So it's like a really nice way to feed and embed different imports into one pipeline. So that's just an overview of GitHub Actions. And before I go any further, do we have some questions in the chat? Because I think it'd be good to address these now before I break out into a demo.
Yeah, I just made a response, but Alan reminded us that there's also this little product called Azure DevOps as well. I'll offer my perspective, but I'd like to hear yours on it, Liam, as well. As I think since this series is very much focused on tech exploration and career exploration, we chose to kind of begin with GitHub and GitHub Actions. However, if you are part of an organization that uses Azure DevOps, we use it internally a lot. We manage our streams and our other things that we're doing on it. It's a delightful tool on that. Certainly, you can check that out more on Microsoft Learn if you're interested in learning as well. But yeah, how do you think about Azure DevOps and GitHub and other tools there, Liam?
It's another really good tool that you can use if you're in a production level environment. So a lot of cloud providers will do this, where you'll have your own specialized tool for something which may be open source, which may be available or widely available outside, but it works really nicely with other services under the same umbrella. So say if you've deployed everything to Azure in app service or container instances, or maybe Azure Kubernetes service, if you're going to be managing that without the public knowledge, so obviously you can have public boards or private boards, but this is a really nice way to keep it under one umbrella. And it gives you that kind of golden path of what's working in Azure across your whole team with the different services. it's very, very much the same as having it in GitHub, or if you have one in a different cloud provider, or maybe even Trello, for example. So Trello is outside of the cloud world, but it's very much a Kanban board and a project board for project managers and teams to use. So Azure DevOps has got everything you need for DevOps just under one roof inside a cloud service provider. So there's no bigger or better. It's really what solves your problem is how I look at Azure DevOps.
Yeah, I like that.
Awesome. I'm seeing a lot of chat about DevSecOps, and I would like to address this before we go any further.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
DevSecOps is DevOps done properly. I find all too often talking to developers at conferences, talking at meetups in the community, security is the last thing that developers tend to think of. And it's only until recently, over the past year or two, that people have coined the term DevSecOps, where you're adding security in. Security should be done from a fundamental day zero from any development standpoint. So DevSecOps versus DevOps is the same thing. It's just done properly. So myself, I'm actually an author ambassador around access identity management and things like that. And it's just, I help to promote that from the get-go. It should always just be done with security in mind.
Yeah, I like that.
It's got like a zero trust policy is what it's called. So don't ever give anybody else like access they don't need access to. And that's actually a good point about DevOps engineering is you're going to be helping with access management. And if you're giving a junior developer all of the admin access to your project, that's probably a bad thing. You only want to give them access to what they're only going to access or want to play with, right? So if there's a small database, only give them access to read and write if they don't need to delete or update anything, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think to build on that too, if you all want to check out more about the security component, that was our first episode. It was security engineer on that, which can be a distinct job role into itself. But one of the highlights from that discussion was the fact that how security is so multifaceted, including the more technical domain of DevOps and such. And so we even catalog things in Microsoft as DevSecOps now. That's actually kind of a taxonomy that we use because of the importance of it and such. So yeah, really good point there, Liam. So just checking time here for our stream. Let's give you plenty of time to share this demo and set up there. And then after that, we'll take some questions from the audience. So if you've got a question for us or for Liam, go ahead and type that in the chat window and I'll kind of monitor that while Liam's doing his demo here.
Awesome. So I'm going to throw my screen up on the stream now and hopefully you see that. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit because I appreciate it's probably a bit small for you. And we don't really need this one. Now, this is a Go web application. Okay, it's just a really simple blog. And at the moment, let's just say I've created it all and it's all deployed. I'm just going to walk you through exactly how it's running, and then we can get into the GitHub Action side of it. So I'm not going to teach you Go, but we have a package, we have some imports, we have got an index, which is going to be the same as HTML, so index.html, but I'm using handlebars. So as we can see here, it's just HTML code populated with some data that I'm passing through from the server. I have a home root, which is on /, so it is rendering the index on the very first. I go to localhost.88 or 3000 in this instance, and it will just show whatever I'm rendering. And this is the main function, which is allowing me to create an application on web server. This is what it's doing. It's just standing up on port 3000 for me. In the index file, we have got a couple of boxes. So I've got a title, I've got a description for India, I've got a description for Dubai, and a description for the USA. So these are cherry-picked 3 destinations I've been to in the past couple of years. And I just wanted to show some pictures and have it out there. It's like a travel blog. This is what it really is. I also have a Docker file. Now, this is where we're going to start getting into the guts and glory of this. The Docker file is a multi-layered Docker file or a multi-stage build. And what I mean by that is I'm using 2 different images to build and deploy this application. Now, if I was to use the Golang image of 1.19, it is going to be quite big and chunky. It's about 300 megabytes, I think, with all of this included. I don't want a 300 megabyte image. I want a really small image because with Go, I can build small binaries. So what I've done is I've copied all of the code across and built the binary with this command here. I'm building for a Linux machine because I'm deploying to a Linux machine. If I was to do this locally, this caught me out a number of times. I'm using a Mac M1, which is the Apple chip. If you're going to build it, you need to be able to run it or build for your platform. if I wrote the go build command, it may be fixed now, but at least a month or two ago when I was last doing this, it was not running at all because I was building it and pushing it up to Azure. And obviously the Azure machine is a Linux machine using ARM64, I think it is. And my Mac machine is using the Apple Silicon chip. So big difference, caught me out. Anyhow, I digress. I've built this binary and I am then going to copy it across to a different image. So I'm using an Alpine image. For anybody who has used any Docker images, Alpine is typically the one that has got everything removed or the very bare bones to run very simple applications and you can build on top of it. For me, I just needed a simple Alpine Linux image and that's what I've got. Copied across my views and my binary, and then I'm exposing it. So in actual fact, this image turned out to be, if I have a look at my images, it turns out to be this one here. So it's about 16 megabytes. So instead of being 300 megabytes, it's now 16. And that is going to save us a lot of time when transferring this between my local machine and the Azure build registry, everything up there. Okay, so you're saving on cost, time, and data transfer. Great way to do this. In here, I've also got a deployment.yaml, which is a GitHub Actions workflow, which allows me to deploy this. So I've given it a name. I'm going to say when it pushes to main. So in my repository, when I push the code to the main branch, I'm going to start this workflow. I've got a couple of environment variables and I've got a job. Now, I appreciate I'm going through this pretty quickly. So if you have any questions, put it in the chat. And Justin, of course, please feel free to ask me questions while I do this as well.
And like I say, if you want to learn more about this, Liam does all sorts of streams on this, so that gets more into the individual code. And so check out his streams for that too.
Awesome. So on the build stage, so within this job here, I've got a build stage. I'm going to be using Ubuntu, which is a Linux distribution. I'm going to check out version 2. And again, I mentioned this earlier, GitHub Actions uses repositories of actions themselves. So it calls it and it pulls it in. And this is exactly what I'm doing here. So actions checkout v2. It's kind of like an import, if you think of it. The same as setting up Go. So I need to check out a repository, which allows me to build Go images, which is what this one's doing. I'm going to run a couple of tests because I've got a test file in here. It's over here. It's just going to test for some files being available. So really important. And then I'm going to do a Docker login. Again, I'm doing another action for Azure. And I'm going to do a Docker login because that's what I need to log into my container registry. Talking of container registries, let's go and have a look at Azure and see what's actually deployed in Azure. So if I go to my resource group, I can see my DevOps demo, and I appreciate this is also very small for you, but let me zoom in a little bit. Maybe that's a bit better. I've got a resource group, which has got 3 items in it. I've got a container registry, which is where I am sticking or storing all of my images, which I build locally. I've got an app service, which is deploying the application to with a container. And I've got an app service plan, which allows me to control everything which is sat on top of it for billing and whatnot. So if I have a little look inside this application, we can see that it's running, or it should be running. It's doing something. And it's available to me. If I was to go have a look at it or browse to it, let's go and click this domain. Over here, we can see, I already had it open, but it's here. Okay, it's running. And I've called it Travel Blog Demo. Looks pretty boring because all I've got is a couple of heading, couple of images that I've got up there, but I'm building it. Okay, now every time I make a change, I have to build this image every single time on my local machine. I then have to push it to the container registry, and then I need to update it in app service. And it's a very manual process. Now, the whole purpose of being a DevOps engineer is how can I make that easier for the software engineer? So I've built this as a software engineer. It's been built. I'm ready to deploy it. I need to automate that for them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go build a pipeline. Now, I've showed you the code already, but what we can do is go and see this in action in GitHub. So the first thing I want to do is go and have a look at the actions. So let's look at some repositories. Let's go and check out, where is it? DevOps demo. And let's go and look in actions. We can see here, if I zoom in a little bit, is that good on the stream, Justin?
It is. We had a little bit of a StreamYard delay here for those of you who's experienced that, but I think we're back on and going well.
Okay, wonderful. So as we can see here, I've got a workflow that has been created and it's running. Now, if I look inside the actions workflow itself, this is just one that I've ran earlier to make sure this was all up and running. I can click on build. Now, as you can see, I've got my different steps here. So I've got setting up go, and it will tell you that I've done that. I can look at the test and just see the test files running. As we can see, it has passed each one of them, which is brilliant, and whatnot. But what I've done since then is deleted the secrets in the repository. Now I need to go and add them back in to allow me to send it off again to Azure. And that's what I wanted to show you today. So if I go into my settings, this is one of the environment variables that I need. So actually, before I do that, if I look at the code, I'll show you what I'm talking about. Down here, where I've got the Docker build and the tag, I've got the server, which is an environment variable, and I've got the image and the tag. Okay, so that's all being pulled from this pipeline itself, which is these environment variables. I could stick the environment variables for my repository in this file, but you don't ever want to do that. You never want to stick secrets in a file. The other way that you can get around that is by having it in the repository. So have it access the repository directly without having to expose it or expose any sort of secrets to the public domain. And as you can see here, I've got secrets.acr username and secrets.acr password. And now that's Azure Container Registry for shorthand. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab them from GitHub. So let's go and get them from my my application. And there's a few ways you can do it. You can do this in the portal, or you can do this in the command line. Now, I am doing this live, and these will be removed and regenerated within minutes of me showing you this. So there's no point in trying to copy them. But if I was to get them from my registry, which is Liam's DevOps demo registry, it will help pump them out to my terminal. Now, of course, I've logged in, and it should give me them back pretty swiftly. And I've got the username and the password. So let's go and add a username to the repository. So I go down, click on settings, and go to secrets and variables. We have a button called actions here. And I want to add a new repository secrets. So I can call this ACR username, give it a value, and add that secret. I also need to go and add in a password secret, of which I can do the same thing. So let's go and add the password. And we can choose one of these. I'm going to choose the first one. Of course, you have two, and that's just done for security reasons. So I can add that second password. I've got no other spaces around it. Now, no one else is going to see that except you guys and myself now. And of course, they will be regenerated, so please don't try and copy them. And what we will do now
is will be deleted upon the end of the stream.
It will be done before that. It will be done as soon as I stop sharing my screen. We've got a lot of people watching, which is good. So what I can do now is I can go and make a change to my application, and I can automate the build process so I don't have to do any of this manually. So if we look at the application itself, that's a pretty boring title, Travel Blog Demo. Looks okay, but I want to go and make a change to that title, and I want it to say Liam's Travel Blog. So let's go and say Liam's Travel Blog. Now I can save that and I can push it, but I need to do one more thing before I do that. I need to make sure that my application can accept incoming changes on the fly. Now in Azure, we've got a really cool little toggle. I say really cool, it's really quite hidden, but it's pretty cool. So this is the application. This is the settings for my app, which is running live, as everyone can see it. In the deployment center, I should be able to see a little toggle at the bottom once it loads, and it'll say continuous deployment. Yeah, it's taken a moment because I'm doing so many things on this laptop. There we go. At the very bottom, I can see here we've got continuous deployment and it's turned off. I need to turn that one on to allow for incoming changes. So let me go ahead and turn that on and save it. And then I'm going to pump in a new change, the one that we just made, and I'm going to send it off to GitHub, and hopefully we'll see the action in live mode. Let's see it going. So let's clear those. I can do this, and I can see, look, I've made a change to my main file. So let's go and add that and commit it. Oh, I can't even see because I've got a little button in the way. Give it a message and say update the title. Oh, what to do? There we go. And push that to my main. Hopefully, we should see a change happen on the actions branch. So let's go and watch it. Let's go and see a new action that got kicked off. As you can see here, it's update the title. It's already kicked off. And let's go and watch it. Let's go and see what it comes out with. I hope this works. I tried this once earlier, and then I started playing with all the demo stuff. So I'm pretty sure it'll work.
Status queued.
It does that while it's running the tests and whatnot. So its good job is it's set up Go and it's managed to test itself. So it's running the test as we speak. And what it's going to do is it's going to do it. That all looks good to me. The fact that thing is wonderful. It's logged into Azure, which is perfect. So that's all we need. And yeah, it looks like it's doing it pretty quickly. It shouldn't be too long now. And then we'll go check it out on the other side. Now, this may take a minute or two to update. So we can probably take some questions as we're waiting. We can leave this running so people can see the screen.
Yeah, we're pretty caught up on chat questions. I had a chance to answer a couple really cool ones while you were demoing, Liam. But for some of us that maybe didn't have as much exposure to some of the jargon or some of the terms that you used in the demo and stuff, tell us a little bit more about the significance of this, right? Like you've got a dev team of 20 software engineers, and you're making this push, and so kind of walk us through the scenario for why this is so extraordinary, I think, for a team, right?
This stops teams from doing this manually. So if I wanted to make this one small title change, so for argument's sake, let's just say I had a typo in one of the paragraphs. In that paragraph, I'd have to make a small little change. That small little change would then mean I need to do every single one of these steps that you've just seen running here manually. I'd have to set up the environment. I would have to set up the test suite and the test environment. I'd have to log into Azure. I'd have to create a new local tag of the image. I would then need to push the Docker image itself to the repository or the registry of where it's being stored, or the Artifactory. And then I need to pull that into an app service. Now, if you can imagine how long that really takes a developer to do, it would take me to start from scratch probably about half an hour to an hour to get all that sorted and make sure it's run properly. That's just for a small little demo like this. Yeah. Imagine if I had a full production system that I needed to test. That's one scenario. The second scenario is software developers typically have powerful machines, but for the argument's sake, let's say you didn't have a powerful machine. If you suddenly have this whole big system that you need to build and deploy, how are you going to do that on your local machine without it really bottoming out and having some issues? You can't. So what you do is you abstract that into the cloud environment, i.e. GitHub Actions, and it allows you to run on different boxes. And what I mean by boxes is different distributions, whether it's Mac OS, whether it's Windows, whether it is any Linux distributions, etc. So like I said, in this one, I'm using Ubuntu, which is a Linux distribution, widely used, open source. But what if I wanted to use Windows? I don't have a Windows box. I have a Mac, and I can universally use Linux. What about Windows? How do I test Windows? Well, I'd find that really hard if I'm going to do that locally. Therefore, this allows me to do it remotely. So there's so many benefits to this. It goes way beyond just having or freeing up some extra time and creating automation. It goes as far as actually helping development teams be a lot more productive within the time that they have.
Yeah, and let's not forget that business stakeholder is going to come back with a change request about 2 hours from now and be like, hey, Liam, can you change that title to something else? And so you're like, I just finished doing all of these manual steps just to get your title shipped to the web application. You're like, no problem. I can make one change to a string and kick off the process again, and magic happens,
Exactly. It allows you to be a lot more agile and a lot more free-flowing with the time you have.
Yeah,
that's absolutely. For sure.
Cool.
So I'm just going to jump in and show you the logs and what's going on here. So we can look at the log stream and we can see what's happened to the container. So once it's connected, it'll show me like a whole stream of logs of where we're up to. This looks scarier than it really is. It's just telling me that, there's been initialized, it's restarted the container because of course this app service is just pulling from the container registry of what it's connected to. So as we can see here, it's got the whole log stream of what's happening. So all of this has been automated, which is brilliant. We can see that it's been stood up and whatnot. So let's go and see if that title updated. I really hope it did. There we go. And instead of demo blog, it's now Liam's travel blog. So that small title change took me a matter of minutes, if that. And this is just using the free basic standard tier that we're using in Azure. So this doesn't incur any cost on me. This is all free. And of course, you can all do this yourself. And I wrote an entire blog of how to go from the very humble beginnings of this code to deploying it and having this whole automated pipeline in process for you, which we can drop a link in a minute.
Very cool. Very cool. And this is a production website. So you did that in real time. Awesome. Cool.
Exactly.
All right. Well, we're just about at time for the stream. Thank you, Liam. I thought that was a great demo and just an example of some of the just really powerful things. Can you imagine what you could do that with much more automation in the future? AI assisted generating those scripts and things like that too. It's pretty cool. So let me go ahead and throw up, let me add back the slide here. Again, as we kind of close out for everyone out there, if you want to learn more about this, do take our Cloud Skills Challenge, aka.ms/launchyourcareerskills. Liam's got some great streams that are coming up too. Be sure to follow him for that as well. And we are just on episode 3 of what I think is going to be many. I've planned about 24 over the course of this time. So you can check out all of those different episodes at Launch Your Career as well. So with that, I don't see any other questions on that. If you want to answer more questions too, we have another stream that we're going to do where we're going to do nothing but answer live chat as well. So more than anything, Liam, I just want to thank you for being our guest today. I thought it was a great conversation and just a really cool career and job role to explore.
It certainly is. Thank you for having me on. Do you want me to drop a link in for my blog, which shows you how to do that A to Z?
Yeah, I do think there was a chat at some point that asked for the demo. So if you've got that on a GitHub repo right now, I think people would love to see that as well.
Yep, so I certainly do. Let me just grab out the link.
Yeah, and that reminds me that we also continue the chat on our Tech Communities platform. We'll post the link for that as well. But if you have any other questions for us, we'll also post the link to Liam's demo on that as well. So thank you again, everyone. We'll see you next time for Launch Your Career, and have a great day.
Thank you.